In the towering glass offices of Vancouver's tech district, a brilliant entrepreneur faces his greatest challenge.
Long time no see.
Not the collapse of his company, but the return of the woman whose mother's death he caused in a tragic accident 3 years ago. When Emma Laurent walks back into his life as the investor who could save his dreams, both must confront whether love can survive the weight of unforgivable mistakes, or if some wounds run too deep for even time to heal. Dear family, from the bottom of my heart, I'm asking for your support. Please, give this video a like and subscribe to this channel. Every single subscription means the world to me. It's not just a number. It's a lifeline that helps our community grow stronger together. I'm truly pleading with you. If you can, please find a place in your heart to click that subscribe button. It may seem small, but to me it means everything. I pray for you. May your days be bright, your nights be restful, and your path be filled with opportunities. May every act of kindness you show come back to you in abundance. Now let's go into this very interesting story. The Vancouver rain drummed against the floor-to-ceiling windows of Chun Technologies as Marcus Chun stared at the city skyline, his reflection ghost-like in the glass. At 32, he had built one of Canada's most promising educational technology companies, but today felt like watching it all slip through his fingers. The plagiarism scandal that had erupted 2 weeks ago, one of his lead developers caught stealing code, had sent investors fleeing faster than tourists from a West Coast storm. Mr. Chun. His assistant's voice cut through his brooding. The investors from Meridian Capital are here. They arrived early. Marcus straightened his tie, a nervous habit he'd developed since the scandal broke. Meridian Capital? The name meant nothing to him, but desperate times called for meeting with anyone willing to listen. Send them to conference room A. I'll be right there. He grabbed the hastily assembled presentation materials, 2 days of work that should have taken 2 weeks. His business partner, David Kim, had warned him that rushing would make them look unprofessional, but Marcus couldn't afford to wait. Not with payroll due next week and their largest client threatening to pull out. The conference room buzzed with the quiet efficiency of people who controlled millions of dollars. 3 figures sat around the polished table. An older man in an expensive suit who radiated the confidence of old money, a younger associate clutching a tablet, and a woman with her back to the door, dark hair pulled into a sleek bun that somehow seemed familiar. Mr. Chun. The older man rose, extending his hand. James Morrison, senior partner at Meridian Capital. This is our associate, Lisa Park, and our lead investment analyst, Emma Laurent. The woman turned, and Marcus felt the world tilt on its axis. Emma Laurent. 3 years hadn't changed the sharp intelligence in her green eyes or the way she held herself with quiet authority. But something fundamental was different. Where once there had been warmth, now there was ice. Where once there had been love, now there was carefully controlled professionalism. Ms. Laurent, Marcus managed, his voice steadier than his hands. Welcome to Chun Technologies. If Emma felt any shock at seeing him, she hid it perfectly behind her investor's mask. Mr. Chun, thank you for accommodating our schedule change. David, who had been reviewing notes in the corner, looked up and his face went white. He'd been Marcus's best friend since university, had been best man at Marcus's wedding to Emma, had held Marcus back from the wreckage of the car that night 3 years ago. Now he watched the two people whose broken love story had haunted him ever since face each other across a boardroom table. Perhaps we should begin, Emma said, opening her portfolio. We've reviewed your preliminary materials, but I have to say, they feel somewhat underdeveloped. Marcus forced himself to focus on business, not on the way Emma's voice had acquired a subtle French-Canadian accent from her time working in Montreal. We assembled everything quickly to accommodate your early arrival. I believe you'll find that what we lack in documentation, we make up for in vision and results. Results. Emma's eyebrow arched in a way that once would have made him smile. Now it felt like a blade. Mr. Chun, your company just lost its largest developer to a plagiarism scandal. Your stock price has dropped 30% in 2 weeks. Several clients have publicly questioned your quality control. What results should we be impressed by? The words stung because they were true, but also because of who was saying them. This was Emma, who used to believe in his dreams even when he doubted them himself. Emma, who had painted watercolor visions of the educational platform they'd build together, who had stayed up countless nights helping him refine his pitch to early investors. Ms. Laurent, Marcus said carefully, you're right that we've faced challenges, but Chen Technologies has revolutionized how students access quality education. We've provided free courses to over 200,000 students across Canada and the US. We've partnered with universities to create degree programs that cost a fraction of traditional education. That mission, that impact, it doesn't disappear because of one employee's poor judgment. Emma made a note on her tablet, her expression unreadable. Tell me about your long-term vision, Mr. Chun. Where do you see this company in 5 years? The question transported him back to a university dorm room, to late nights fueled by instant ramen and impossible dreams. Emma had asked him the same question once, lying beside him in the narrow bed they'd shared when they were 22 and believed they could change the world together. 5 years ago, he began, his voice gaining strength, I was a graduate student watching my classmates abandon their education because they couldn't afford tuition. I watched brilliant minds give up on their dreams because the system was rigged against anyone who wasn't wealthy. That's when I realized education isn't just about information. It's about hope. He moved to the whiteboard, sketching out the platform architecture with quick, confident strokes. Our AI-powered learning system doesn't just deliver content. It adapts to each student's learning style, identifies their strengths and challenges, provides personalized support that makes quality education accessible to anyone with an internet connection. Despite herself, Emma leaned forward slightly. Marcus had always been magnetic when he talked about his work, able to make even the most cynical investor believe in the possibility of changing the world through technology. But belief doesn't pay the bills, she said, her tone carefully neutral. Your revenue model shows heavy losses. You're giving away your core product for free. How do you expect to build a sustainable business? Because education shouldn't be a luxury good, Marcus replied, meeting her eyes directly for the first time since she turned around. We monetize through premium services, corporate partnerships, and licensing our technology to institutions. But our foundation courses remain free because the moment we put knowledge behind a paywall, we become part of the problem we're trying to solve. The room fell silent except for the rain against the windows. James Morrison exchanged a glance with Lisa Park, while Emma studied her notes with the intensity of someone trying to avoid looking at anything else. Mr. Chan, Morrison said finally, your passion is evident, but Ms. Laurent raises valid concerns about sustainability. We've seen too many idealistic startups fail because they prioritized mission over margins. With respect, Mr. Morrison, Marcus said, some things are worth fighting for even if the path isn't easy. 3 years ago, I made a promise to myself about the kind of company I wanted to build. Not just profitable, but meaningful. The kind of company that measures success in lives changed, not just dollars earned. Emma's pen stopped moving across her tablet. For just a moment, her professional mask slipped, and Marcus saw a flicker of the woman who had once shared those dreams with him. We'll need time to review everything thoroughly, she said, closing her portfolio. Can you have detailed financial projections ready by tomorrow morning? Of course, Marcus replied, though he had no idea how his skeleton crew would pull together comprehensive projections overnight. As the Meridian Capital team prepared to leave, Emma lingered behind while Morrison and Park discussed their next meeting in the hallway. Marcus, she said quietly, using his first name for the first time. I need you to know this is business. Nothing more. Don't read anything personal into my being here. I understand, he replied, though they both knew it was more complicated than that. Emma, I don't. She cut him off, her voice sharp. Whatever you're about to say, don't. Some things can't be undone with words. She walked away, leaving Marcus alone in the conference room with the scent of her perfume and the weight of everything they'd never be able to discuss in a boardroom setting. David appeared in the doorway, his face full of the concern that had become familiar over the past 3 years. You okay, man? Define okay, Marcus said, slumping into a chair. The woman whose mother I killed is now the investor who might save my company. I'm either living in a soap opera or the universe has a really twisted sense of humor. You didn't kill her mother, Marcus. It was an accident. Tell that to Emma. Tell that to Mrs. Lawrence Memorial Service, where Emma looked at me like I was a murderer. Marcus rubbed his temples, feeling the familiar headache that accompanied thoughts of that night. Do you think she engineered this? Found out it was my company and decided to come here to destroy it? David considered this. The Emma I knew wasn't vindictive. Hurt, yes. Angry, absolutely. But not cruel. People change. 3 years is a long time. So do you still love her? The question hung in the air like smoke from a fire neither of them wanted to acknowledge was still burning. It doesn't matter, Marcus said finally. She's made it clear this is business only. And honestly, maybe that's for the best. We both have too much baggage to pretend otherwise. But as he stared out at the Vancouver skyline, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that Emma's return was more than coincidence. Whether she was here to save his company or bury it remained to be seen. But one thing was certain. The next few weeks would force them both to confront the ghosts they'd spent 3 years trying to outrun. The rain continued to fall against the glass, washing the city clean but unable to wash away the past that had just walked back into his life in a designer suit and an investor's calculating smile. That evening, as Marcus worked alone in his office trying to pull together the financial projections Emma had requested, he found himself thinking about the last time he'd seen her. Not at the funeral, where she'd refused to speak to him, but 2 weeks later when she'd returned to their shared apartment to pack her belongings. She'd moved through the space they'd built together like a ghost, carefully avoiding the photos on the mantel, the coffee mug with her name on it, the watercolor paintings of their imaginary future hanging on the walls. She'd packed only the necessities, leaving behind everything that spoke of the love they'd shared. Keep the rest, she'd said when he tried to give her the engagement ring she'd left on the kitchen table the night of the accident. I don't want anything that reminds me of what we were. Now she was back, successful and polished and completely out of reach, holding the future of his company in her perfectly manicured hands. Marcus had built Chen Technologies partly as penance, partly as proof that something good could come from tragedy. If Emma decided to destroy it, he wasn't sure he'd have the strength to start over again. But as he worked through the numbers, creating projections and scenarios that might convince Meridian Capital to take a chance on his broken company, Marcus realized something had changed. For the first time in 3 years, he felt truly awake. Emma's presence had reactivated something in him that had been dormant since the accident. Not just love, but the drive to prove himself worthy of the dreams they'd once shared. Whether she was here to save him or destroy him, Emma Laurent had reminded Marcus Chen why he'd started fighting in the first place. Now he just had to figure out if he was strong enough to keep fighting, even if it meant losing her all over again. The Fairmont Hotel Vancouver's rooftop bar buzzed with the quiet conversations of the city's business elite, but Emma Laurent felt utterly alone despite being surrounded by networking opportunities. She sat at a corner table overlooking the harbor, nursing a glass of wine she'd barely touched while reviewing Chen Technologies' financial documents on her tablet. Burning the midnight oil, Emma looked up to find David Kim approaching her table, his usually cheerful demeanor tempered by obvious concern. They'd been friends once, before everything fell apart, before Marcus became the name she couldn't bear to hear spoken aloud. David, she gestured to the empty chair across from her. I suppose Marcus sent you to lobby on his behalf? Actually, he doesn't know I'm here. David settled into the chair, signaling the server for a drink. I saw you from across the room and thought we should talk. There's nothing to discuss. This is a business evaluation, nothing more. Emma, come on. It's me. We've known each other since university. You can drop the Ice Queen act. Despite herself, Emma felt her professional mask slip slightly. David had always been able to see through her defenses, had been the one to introduce her to Marcus at that campus coffee shop 7 years ago. It's not an act, she said quietly. It's survival. David's drink arrived. Whiskey? Neat. The way he'd always ordered it during their university days when they gather at the campus pub to celebrate exam victories or drown academic sorrows. You know he never got over you, David said without preamble. 3 years, Emma. 3 years of watching my best friend punish himself for something that was never entirely his fault. Not entirely his fault? Emma's voice rose sharply enough that nearby tables turned to look. She lowered it to a fierce whisper. He was drinking, David. He'd been at that client dinner for hours, and he insisted on driving instead of calling a cab. My mother died because of his arrogance. Your mother died because a drunk driver ran a red light and slammed into your car, David corrected gently. Marcus had 2 glasses of wine over 3 hours. He was under the legal limit. The police report. Don't. Emma's hand trembled as she reached for her wine glass. Don't quote legal documents at me. I was there, David. I saw him at dinner, saw how he kept ordering another round, saw how he brushed off my suggestion that we take an Uber home. You were also in shock and grief. Sometimes trauma makes us remember things differently than they actually happened. Emma stared at her former friend, seeing genuine concern in his eyes, but feeling only the familiar surge of anger that had sustained her through the darkest period of her life. Why are you defending him? Because someone has to. He won't defend himself. David leaned forward, his voice earnest. Emma, do you know what he did after you left Vancouver? She shook her head, not trusting herself to speak. He sold his car, never drove again, takes public transit or walks everywhere, even in the rain. He visits your mother's grave every month, leaves flowers, sits there for hours. He established a scholarship fund in her name at UBC. Anonymous, of course. He's donated over $100,000 to drunk driving prevention programs. Each revelation hit Emma like a physical blow. She'd spent 3 years building a wall of anger around her grief, and David was systematically dismantling it brick by brick. That doesn't bring her back, she said, but her voice lacked its earlier conviction. No, it doesn't, but it shows that the man you fell in love with is still in there, buried under 3 years of guilt and self-hatred. Emma closed her tablet, no longer able to focus on financial projections when her carefully constructed emotional defenses were crumbling. Do you know why I took this assignment? She asked. Because you're one of the best investment analysts in the country? Because when I saw Chun Technologies on our potential client list, I wanted to see what had become of him. I told myself it was professional curiosity, but the truth is, I never stopped wondering. David nodded as if he'd suspected as much. And now that you've seen him? Now I don't know what to think. Emma's voice was barely above a whisper. He looked tired, David. Older. But when he talked about his company, about the students they're helping, for a moment he was the same man I fell in love with. The one who wanted to change the world through education. He built that company because of your mother's death, you know. Not despite it, but because of it. He was destroyed after the accident. Emma couldn't function for months. But when he finally started working again, all he could talk about was building something that would honor her memory. Education was her passion, right? She was a teacher. Emma nodded, tears threatening despite her efforts to maintain control. High school French. She loved her students, always stayed late to help them with their homework, always believed they could achieve more than they thought possible. Marcus's platform provides free language learning modules. Over 50,000 Canadian students have learned French through his program. He never talks about it, never markets it, but it's there. A living memorial to your mother. The tears Emma had been holding back for 3 years finally broke free, sliding down her cheeks as she struggled to process this information. She'd been so focused on her anger, so committed to her narrative of Marcus as the selfish man who destroyed her family, that she'd never considered he might be grieving too. I hate him, she whispered, but the words sounded hollow even to her own ears. No, you don't. You hate the accident. You hate that your mother is gone. You hate that the future you planned together was stolen in an instant. But you don't hate Marcus. Emma wiped her eyes with a napkin, grateful that the dim lighting hid her emotional breakdown from the other patrons. It's too late, David. Too much has happened. Too much pain. Is it? You're here, Emma. You could have recommended that Meridian pass on the investment without ever meeting with him. You could have sent a junior analyst to handle the evaluation. But you came yourself. To get closure, she said, though the words felt like a lie. Or to see if there's still something worth saving. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, watching the lights of Vancouver Harbor twinkle in the darkness. Finally, Emma spoke. "Tell me about the company. Really tell me. Not the investor pitch, but the truth." David's expression grew serious. "It's struggling. The plagiarism scandal hurt them badly, and they were already operating on thin margins because Marcus refuses to charge for basic services. He's got maybe 6 weeks of cash flow left, and without new investment, they'll have to close down. And personally, how is he really? Lonely. Dedicated to the point of obsession. He hasn't dated anyone since you left. Hasn't even tried. He works 18-hour days. Lives in a studio apartment that looks like a monk's cell, and pours every penny back into the company. It's like he's trying to earn his way back to being worthy of the dreams you two once shared." Emma finished her wine, feeling the weight of 3 years of carefully maintained anger finally beginning to lift. "I should go," she said, gathering her things. "I need to finish my evaluation report." "Emma," David stood as she prepared to leave. "Whatever you decide about the investment, please don't decide it based on anger. Your mother wouldn't have wanted that." The words followed Emma back to her hotel room, where she sat on the edge of the bed staring at her laptop screen. The cursor blinked in the empty document where her recommendation should go, but she couldn't make herself type either approve or deny. Instead, she found herself thinking about her mother's last words, spoken in the hospital as Emma held her hand and Marcus sat in the waiting room, banned from the room by Emma's father's fury. "Don't let this destroy your happiness, ma chérie," her mother had whispered in French, their private language for intimate conversations. "Accidents happen. Love is rarer." At the time, Emma had thought her mother was delirious from the pain medication. Now, 3 years later, she wondered if those had been the clearest words anyone had spoken about the tragedy that had shattered so many lives. Her phone buzzed with a text from her assistant in Montreal. "Flight booked for tomorrow evening. The Peterson merger documents need review by Friday." Emma stared at the message, realizing that in 12 hours she would be back in her carefully controlled world of investment analysis and strategic recommendations, far from the emotional minefield that Vancouver had become. She opened her laptop and began typing her evaluation report, but the words that appeared on the screen weren't the clinical assessment she'd intended to write. Instead, she found herself crafting a story about second chances, about companies built from grief and hope, about the possibility that some bridges burned in anger might still be worth rebuilding. By 3 in the morning, Emma had written and deleted a dozen different versions of her recommendation. Some recommended the investment based purely on financial projections. Others advised against it due to management instability and market uncertainties. But none of them captured. The morning of Emma's final presentation arrived gray and drizzling, typical Vancouver weather that seemed to match the emotional climate surrounding Chen Technologies. Marcus arrived at the office 2 hours early, unable to sleep after spending the night running financial scenarios that all led to the same conclusion. Without Meridian Capital's investment, his company would be bankrupt within 6 weeks. David found him in the break room at 7 a.m., mechanically stirring coffee that had already gone cold. "You look like hell," David observed, pouring his own cup from the machine that had been making increasingly questionable noises lately. "Feel worse than I look," Marcus replied. "Did you know Emma had dinner with her father last night?" "How do you know that?" "I didn't mean to find out. I was walking past the hotel restaurant after my meeting with the creditors, and I saw them through the window." Marcus set down his mug, the coffee untouched. He looked older, gray hair, thinner than I remember. But his expression when he saw me through the glass, "David, if looks could kill, I'd be a corpse." David had met Emma's father, Professor Laurent, several times during Marcus and Emma's relationship. A distinguished literature professor at UBC, he had initially welcomed Marcus into the family with the warmth typical of French-Canadian hospitality. After the accident, that warmth had transformed into a hatred so pure it was almost tangible. "What did you do?" "What could I do?" I kept walking, pretended I hadn't seen them, but I caught a glimpse of Emma's face when she realized I was there. She looked, I don't know, sad? Guilty? It was only for a second before she turned away. The office slowly filled with the sounds of their small team arriving for what might be their final week of work. The atmosphere was tense. Everyone knew the company's fate hung in the balance, though only Marcus and David understood the personal dimensions of the crisis. Mr. Chun, Sarah, their receptionist, appeared in the break room doorway. Ms. Laurent is here for the 9 o'clock meeting. She's in conference room A. Marcus felt his stomach drop. Emma was 30 minutes early, which could mean she was eager to deliver good news or wanted extra time to explain why she was about to destroy his life's work. "Tell her I'll be right there," he said, then turned to David. "If this goes badly, it won't. But if it does, I need you to promise me something. Take care of the team. Help them find new positions. And the student data, make sure it's transferred to a platform that will keep the free courses available. The kids depending on those programs shouldn't suffer because I couldn't make the business side work." David clasped his friend's shoulder. "Marcus, stop planning your company's funeral. You don't know what Emma's going to say." But as Marcus walked toward conference room A, he felt like a man approaching his own execution. Through the glass walls, he could see Emma seated at the conference table, her posture rigid with the tension of someone about to deliver difficult news. She looked up as he entered, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. The professional distance she'd maintained during their previous meeting seemed less secure today. Something vulnerable flickered in her green eyes before she quickly looked away. "Good morning, Emma." "Marcus." She gestured to the chair across from her. "Please sit. We have a lot to discuss." He settled into the chair, noticing that she'd positioned herself as far away from him as the table allowed. Her portfolio lay closed beside her laptop, and a single folder marked "Confidential" sat between them like a barrier. "Before we begin," Emma said, her voice carefully modulated, "I need you to understand that what I'm about to tell you is Meridian Capital's official position. My personal feelings have no bearing on this recommendation." Marcus nodded, though they both knew that was impossible. Their personal history colored everything, had shaped every moment since she'd walked back into his life 2 days ago. "I've completed my evaluation of Chun Technologies," Emma continued, opening her laptop and pulling up a presentation that Marcus couldn't see from his angle. "Your financial situation is more precarious than your initial materials suggested. Your revenue streams are inconsistent, your operational costs are too high for your income model, and the recent scandal has damaged your market position significantly." Each word felt like a nail being driven into a coffin. Marcus kept his expression neutral, but inside he was already calculating how to break the news to his team, how to wind down operations with minimal damage to the students depending on their platform. "However," Emma said, and that single word made Marcus's heart skip a beat, "your impact metrics are extraordinary. The social value proposition of your educational platform is unlike anything I've evaluated in my career." She turned her laptop so he could see the screen, which displayed a comprehensive analysis he'd never seen before. Charts showed user engagement rates, educational outcome improvements, demographic breakdowns of students accessing free courses. "How did you get all this data?" Marcus asked, genuinely amazed by the depth of her research. "I spent yesterday interviewing students who've used your platform, teachers who've integrated your courses into their curricula, parents whose children have benefited from your language programs." Emma's professional mask slipped slightly, revealing something that looked like genuine admiration. "Marcus, do you realize what you've built here?" He stared at the data, seeing his company's impact quantified in ways that made his chest tighten with emotion. "We always knew we were helping students, but I had no idea the scale was this significant. 15-year-old Sarah Martinez in East Vancouver learned French through your platform and is now fluent enough to qualify for advanced placement classes. James Wilson, a 43-year-old construction worker, completed your business fundamentals course and started his own contracting company. Maria Santos discovered a passion for coding through your programming modules and just received a scholarship to study computer science at SFU. Each story hit Marcus like a revelation. He'd been so focused on keeping the company afloat financially that he'd lost sight of the human impact driving everything he'd built. "These aren't just user statistics," Emma continued. her voice growing warmer despite her obvious efforts to maintain professional distance. These are lives changed, futures created, dreams made possible for people who couldn't otherwise afford quality education. Marcus looked up from the screen to find Emma watching him intently, her green eyes bright with an emotion he couldn't quite identify. "So what does this mean for your recommendation?" Emma was quiet for a long moment, seeming to weigh her words carefully. Finally, she opened the confidential folder and slid a document across the table. Meridian Capital is prepared to offer Chun Technologies a $3 million investment over 18 months, with specific milestones tied to platform expansion and user growth rather than traditional profit metrics. Marcus stared at the document, unable to process what he was reading. $3 million. Enough to stabilize operations, expand the platform, hire back the developers they'd had to let go. "There are conditions," Emma continued, her voice becoming more businesslike. "You'll need to bring in a COO with proven experience in educational technology scaling. Your financial reporting will be subject to monthly review. And," she hesitated, "I'll be serving as Meridian's primary liaison for this investment, which means regular check-ins and progress evaluations. You're going to be overseeing the investment personally? If you accept our terms, yes. I'll be relocating to Vancouver for the duration of the investment period." The implications hit Marcus like a physical blow. Emma living in the same city again, working together albeit in a professional capacity, seeing each other regularly while navigating the minefield of their shared history. "Why?" he asked quietly. "Why approve the investment, and why take on the oversight role yourself?" Emma closed her laptop, her professional presentation complete. For a moment, she seemed to struggle with how to answer his question. "Because," she said finally, "my mother believed education could change the world. She spent her entire career teaching kids who others had written off, showing them they were capable of more than they'd ever imagined. Your platform does the same thing, but on a scale she never could have dreamed of." Her voice caught slightly as she continued. "And because she would never forgive me if I let my personal pain destroy something this important." The conference room fell silent except for the rain against the windows. Marcus found himself remembering Professor Lawrence's passion for education, her infectious enthusiasm when she talked about her students' progress, the way she'd light up when discussing lesson plans over family dinners. "Emma, I need you to know. Don't." She held up a hand, stopping him. "Don't say anything about the past. Not today. Today is about the future of your company and the students who need what you're building." Marcus nodded, understanding that while she was offering him a lifeline, she wasn't ready to discuss the deeper currents flowing beneath their professional interaction. "I accept Meridian's terms," he said formally. "Good. I'll have the contracts prepared by end of week." Emma gathered her materials, preparing to leave. "One more thing, Marcus. This investment comes with expectations. Meridian isn't in the business of charity. We expect results, growth, measurable impact. The fact that we have history doesn't mean I'll go easy on you if you don't deliver." As she reached the door, Marcus called out, "Emma." She turned, her hand on the door handle. "Thank you for seeing what this company could be, not just what it is right now." Something flickered across her face. Surprise, maybe, or recognition of the double meaning in his words. "Don't thank me yet," she replied. "Wait until you see how demanding I can be as an investor." After she left, Marcus sat alone in the conference room, staring at the investment documents that would save his company. Outside, the Vancouver rain continued to fall, but for the first time in 3 years, it felt like it might be washing things clean rather than simply washing them away. David appeared in the doorway, his expression hopeful but cautious. "Well, we got the investment," Marcus said, still unable to fully believe it. $3 million over 18 months. David whooped with joy, then caught sight of Marcus's expression. "Why do you look like someone just sentenced you to prison?" "Because Emma's moving back to Vancouver to oversee the investment personally." Understanding dawned on David's face. "Oh, yeah. Oh." Marcus stood, squaring his shoulders with the resolve of a man who just committed to the most challenging period of his professional and personal life. I guess we're about to find out if it's possible to work with someone you love, but can never have. Someone whose trust you broke so thoroughly that even their forgiveness comes with conditions. As word of the investment spread through the office, Marcus found himself surrounded by celebrating employees who saw only the financial salvation, not the emotional complexity that came with it. But as he watched his team's relief and excitement, he realized Emma had been right. This was bigger than their personal history. Chun Technologies would survive and grow, continuing to provide educational opportunities for students who needed them most. If the price of that success was working alongside the woman whose heart he'd broken, whose mother had died because of his choices, then it was a price he'd gladly pay. The only question now was whether either of them would survive the process with their carefully reconstructed lives intact. Emma's first day as Chun Technologies' primary investor liaison began with a crisis that had nothing to do with financial projections or market analysis. She arrived at the company's offices to find Marcus in heated conversation with a woman in an expensive suit, whose voice could be heard through the supposedly soundproof conference room walls. "That's Margaret Chen?" David explained, appearing at Emma's elbow with 2 cups of coffee and a grimace. Marcus's mother. Emma remembered Margaret Chen as a formidable woman who had never quite approved of her son's choice to marry a professor's daughter instead of someone from Vancouver's established Chinese-Canadian business community. The fact that she was here now, just days after news of the Meridian investment had leaked to the press, couldn't be coincidental. Absolutely irresponsible to put our family name at risk by associating with people who have questioned your judgment, Margaret was saying as Emma approached the conference room. Through the glass, Emma could see Marcus's shoulders tense with barely controlled frustration. "Mrs. Chun." Emma knocked once and entered without waiting for permission. "I'm Emma Laurent from Meridian Capital. I believe we met briefly several years ago." The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees as Margaret turned to face her. At 65, Marcus's mother retained the sharp elegance that had made her a force in Vancouver's social circles. But her expression as she looked at Emma was arctic. "Miss Laurent, how? Interesting to see you again. It's Ms. Laurent now, actually. And I understand your concerns about the investment arrangement, though I should mention that all Meridian decisions are based on comprehensive due diligence, not personal considerations." Emma's tone was politely professional, but Marcus could see the steel underneath. This was the woman who had spent 3 years building a reputation as one of Canada's most successful investment analysts, someone who commanded respect in boardrooms across the country. "Marcus," Margaret said, turning back to her son, "I think you need to consider the implications of this arrangement very carefully. Our family has worked for decades to build our reputation in this city." "Mother," Marcus's voice carried a warning edge, "this is a business meeting. Everything is business in our family, darling. And mixing business with personal complications rarely ends well." Margaret's eyes flicked meaningfully between Marcus and Emma. Emma felt the familiar surge of anger she'd spent 3 years learning to control. Margaret Chun had never hidden her disapproval of her son's relationship with a non-Chinese woman from a middle-class academic family. The fact that she was using the tragedy that had destroyed Emma's family as ammunition in some misguided protective campaign made Emma's professional composure feel razor-thin. "Mrs. Chun," Emma said, her voice dangerously calm, "I can assure you that Meridian Capital's investment decisions are based entirely on market analysis and growth potential. Chun Technologies represents an exceptional opportunity in the educational technology sector. My personal history with your son, whatever you may think it is, has no bearing on that assessment." "Personal history?" Margaret's eyebrows rose. "My dear, you disappeared for 3 years without a word, and now you conveniently return just as Marcus's company faces bankruptcy? Forgive me if I find the timing suspicious." The accusation hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Emma felt something snap inside her chest, the careful control she'd maintained since returning to Vancouver finally cracking under the weight of grief, guilt, and now being accused of opportunism by the woman who had never thought her good enough for Marcus in the first place. "Suspicious." Emma's voice rose despite her efforts to maintain professionalism. "You think I engineered my mother's death to create some elaborate revenge scheme? You think I spent 3 years building my career in Montreal, so I could come back here and destroy your son's company? Emma, please. Marcus started, but she cut him off. No, Marcus. Let me be clear about something, Mrs. Chun. I didn't return to Vancouver to help your son or hurt him. I came here to do my job. The fact that Chun Technologies happened to be on Meridian's evaluation list was coincidence. Nothing more. But now that I'm here, I'll tell you what I've discovered. Emma pulled up her tablet, her hands trembling slightly with suppressed emotion. Your son has built something remarkable. Not just a profitable business, though it has that potential, but a platform that's changing lives. 17,000 students have improved their academic performance using his programs. Over 40 teachers have integrated his technology into their curricula because it works better than anything else available. She turned the screen toward Margaret, showing the impact metrics she'd compiled. This company doesn't just deserve investment. It deserves recognition. Your son isn't just a businessman. He's an educator, an innovator, someone who's found a way to make quality education accessible to people who couldn't otherwise afford it. Margaret examined the data, her expression unreadable. These are impressive numbers, Miss Laurent, but numbers don't address the real question here. Which is, whether you can be trusted to act in my son's best interests when you've already proven capable of abandoning him when things become difficult. The words hit Emma like a physical blow. She felt the careful distance she'd maintained since returning to Vancouver collapse entirely, replaced by the raw pain of loss and the crushing weight of decisions made in grief and anger. I didn't abandon him, Emma said, her voice barely above a whisper. I lost my mother because he insisted on driving after he'd been drinking. I lost our future because he was too proud to admit he'd had too much wine to be behind the wheel of a car. I didn't abandon Marcus, Mrs. Chun. He destroyed us. The conference room fell into complete silence. Through the glass walls, Emma could see the Chun Technology staff pretending not to watch the drama unfolding in their conference room. But she was beyond caring about professional appearances. Emma. Marcus's voice was hoarse with emotion. Don't. She held up a hand, stopping him. Don't try to explain or apologize or make this about misunderstandings. Your mother wants to know if I can be trusted to act in your best interests? The answer is yes, because despite everything that happened between us, I still believe in what you're trying to build here. But don't mistake professional respect for personal forgiveness. She gathered her materials, preparing to leave, but Margaret's voice stopped her. Miss Laurent, may I ask you something? Emma turned, expecting another accusation or dismissal. What would your mother have wanted you to do about this investment? The question was so unexpected, so precisely aimed at Emma's deepest source of pain, that for a moment she couldn't respond. When she finally spoke, her voice was thick with unshed tears. She would have wanted me to help these students get the education they deserve. She spent 30 years teaching kids who everyone else had written off. She believed education was the one thing that could break any cycle of poverty or discrimination. Emma met Margaret's eyes directly. She would have approved this investment without hesitation. Even knowing it meant working closely with the man responsible for her death? Emma flinched at the blunt phrasing, but forced herself to consider the question seriously. My mother was a teacher, Mrs. Chun. She understood that sometimes the most important lessons come from the most difficult circumstances. She would have said that letting my pain prevent these students from accessing quality education would be a betrayal of everything she stood for. Margaret nodded slowly, something like respect flickering in her expression. I see why my son fell in love with you. The admission hung in the air, surprising all three of them. Margaret Chun was not known for emotional declarations or admissions of error. Mrs. Chun, Emma began. Margaret, please. We're all adults here, and we all want what's best for Marcus's company. She looked at her son, who had been watching this exchange with growing amazement. I owe you both an apology. I came here today prepared to fight old battles that have nothing to do with the present situation. She stood, smoothing her skirt with the composed gesture of a woman accustomed to command. Miss Laurent, I hope you'll accept my interference as a mother's concern for her son, misguided though it may have been. Marcus, I trust your judgment about the business partnership. I always have. After Margaret left, Emma and Marcus found themselves alone in the conference room. The weight of everything that had been said and left unsaid pressing down on them like a physical presence. She's right about one thing, Emma said finally. This arrangement is complicated. Maybe too complicated. I could recommend that Meridian assign a different liaison. No. Marcus's response was immediate and firm. Emma, I need you to know something. What happened 3 years ago, I've replayed that night 1,000 times. You were right to be angry. You were right to leave. I made choices that cost us everything, and I'll have to live with that for the rest of my life. He moved to the window, staring out at the Vancouver skyline that had witnessed their love story and its destruction. But this company, this work we're doing, it's the only good thing to come out of that tragedy. And if there's a chance, even a small one, that we can work together to make it better, to help more students, to honor what your mother believed about education, then I think we owe it to her memory to try. Emma joined him at the window, standing close enough to smell his cologne but far enough away to maintain the distance that felt necessary for survival. It won't be easy, she said. Working together, pretending the past doesn't exist. We don't have to pretend it doesn't exist. We just have to decide that the future is more important than the past. They stood in silence, watching the city below go about its daily business, unaware that in a conference room 40 floors above, two people who had once shared everything were tentatively, carefully, beginning to explore whether they could share a professional future built on the ashes of their personal past. There's one condition, Emma said finally. We keep this strictly professional. No discussions about what we used to mean to each other. No attempts to relitigate old arguments. No personal conversations that don't directly relate to the company. Marcus nodded, though something in his expression suggested he understood how impossible that condition might be to maintain. Agreed. Strictly professional. Good. Then let's get to work. Your platform has incredible potential, but there are structural changes that need to happen if we're going to scale effectively. As they settled back at the conference table, spreading out financial projections and market analyses, both Emma and Marcus tried to ignore the electricity that crackled between them whenever their hands accidentally brushed over documents. They tried to pretend that working together felt natural, comfortable, right in ways that had nothing to do with business and everything to do with the connection that tragedy had broken but not entirely destroyed. What neither of them knew was that the city of Vancouver, with its rain-washed streets and harbor views, was about to become the stage for a redemption story that would test every boundary they just established and force them both to confront the question of whether some loves are too deep to ever truly die. 2 months into their professional partnership, Emma and Marcus had developed a routine that walked the razor's edge between productivity and emotional combustion. They met every Tuesday and Thursday morning at 7 a.m. in the Chun Technologies conference room, where Emma reviewed progress reports and Marcus presented expansion plans over coffee that had become increasingly less terrible as the company's finances improved. Today's meeting, however, felt different. Emma had arrived to find Marcus already in the conference room, but instead of his usual pile of financial documents, he sat staring at his laptop screen with an expression she hadn't seen in years. Pure, unfiltered excitement. "You're early," she said, settling into her usual chair across from him. "Emma, you need to see this." Marcus turned his laptop so she could view the screen. "Do you remember Sarah Martinez?" The name was familiar, the 15-year-old East Vancouver student who had learned French through Marcus's platform and qualified for advanced placement classes. Of course, she was one of the success stories in my initial impact analysis. She just won the provincial French language competition. First place in the advanced category, beating students from private schools who've been studying French since kindergarten. Marcus's voice carried a wonder that made Emma's chest tighten with recognition. This was the same tone he'd used 7 years ago when describing his dreams of democratizing education. Emma studied the news article on his screen, seeing Sarah's beaming face as she accepted a trophy that would secure her university scholarships and open doors that had seemed impossible just 2 years earlier. "That's incredible," Emma said, meaning it. "She started with your platform at what level?" "Complete beginner. No French background at all. She's been using our adaptive learning modules for 18 months. Marcus leaned forward, his professional composure giving way to genuine enthusiasm. But that's not the best part. Look at this. He scrolled down to show Emma a video message Sarah had recorded for the Chun Technologies team. In fluent French, the teenager thanked Marcus and his team for creating a platform that had changed her life and opened a world she never knew existed. She's planning to study international relations at UBC with a focus on Canadian-French diplomatic history, Marcus continued. Her guidance counselor says she's one of the most promising students she's ever worked with. Emma found herself blinking back unexpected tears as she watched the video. This was why she'd approved the Meridian investment, why she'd taken the risk of working with Marcus despite their complicated history. Stories like Sarah's proved that some things transcended personal pain and professional boundaries. There's more, Marcus said, his excitement bubbling over. We've had 3 other competition winners this month. The algorithm updates you suggested for personalized learning paths are working even better than we projected. User engagement is up 40%. Completion rates have improved by 60%. And he stopped suddenly, seeming to realize that his enthusiasm had carried him past the professional boundaries they'd established. Emma saw the moment he remembered their agreement about keeping things strictly business, saw the wall go up behind his eyes as he retreated into safer territory. Sorry, he said, closing the laptop. I know you're here for the quarterly review, not to listen to me celebrate individual success stories. The withdrawal stung more than Emma wanted to admit. For just a moment, she'd seen the Marcus she'd fallen in love with, passionate, idealistic, utterly convinced that they could change the world through education. The Marcus who used to stay up until 3 a.m. sketching out platform features while she painted watercolor visions of the classrooms they transformed together. Marcus, she said carefully, celebrating student success isn't unprofessional. It's the point of everything we're doing here. Right? Of course. But the enthusiasm had drained from his voice, replaced by the careful neutrality that had characterized all their interactions since she'd returned to Vancouver. Emma made a decision that scared her with its implications. Show me the other winners. What? You said there were 3 other competition winners this month. Show me their stories. For a moment, Marcus hesitated, clearly torn between professional caution and his obvious desire to share these victories with someone who would understand their significance. Emma, we agreed. We agreed to keep our personal history out of our working relationship. These students' successes aren't our personal history, Marcus. They're proof that the investment strategy is working. It was a thin justification and they both knew it. But Marcus reopened his laptop and began sharing the stories that had clearly been consuming his thoughts. There was James Wilson, the construction worker who had parlayed his business fundamentals certificate into a thriving contracting company that now employed 12 people. Maria Santos, who had discovered her passion for coding through Chun Technologies programming modules and had just been accepted to Stanford's computer science program with a full scholarship. As Marcus talked, Emma found herself remembering why she'd fallen in love with him in the first place. It wasn't just his intelligence or ambition, though he had both in abundance. It was his capacity to see potential in people others had overlooked. His genuine belief that education could break down any barrier if you could just find the right way to deliver it. The most interesting case, Marcus continued, pulling up another file, is actually a family success story. Luis and Carmen Rodriguez enrolled in our English as a second language program 6 months ago. They're both in their 50s, originally from El Salvador, have been living in Vancouver for 15 years, but always struggled with language barriers that limited their employment opportunities. Emma leaned forward, drawn into the story despite herself. Carmen completed our business English certification and was just promoted to floor supervisor at the textile factory, where she's worked for 8 years. Luis used our technical English modules to qualify for a maintenance position with BC Hydro, double his previous salary with full benefits. That's amazing, but how is it a family success story? Marcus's smile held a warmth that made Emma's heart skip in ways she'd spent 2 months trying to suppress. Their 16-year-old daughter, Isabella, saw her parents studying every night after work and decided to enroll in our advanced mathematics program. She's now tutoring other students and has been accepted to UBC's engineering program. One platform, 3 family members, completely different educational paths, Emma murmured, seeing the bigger picture. Marcus, do you realize what this represents? What do you mean? Traditional education assumes one-size-fits-all approaches. Your platform adapts to individual learning styles, schedules, and goals within the same family unit. You're not just providing courses, you're providing customized educational ecosystems. The implications hit them both simultaneously. This wasn't just a successful investment or a feel-good story about individual achievement. This was proof of concept for a completely new model of education delivery. Emma, Marcus said, his voice carrying the same excitement that had characterized his early platform demonstrations. What if we could scale this? What if instead of serving individual students, we could serve entire communities? You mean geographic targeting? Identifying underserved neighborhoods and creating comprehensive educational support systems. Exactly. Imagine if we could work with community centers, libraries, immigrant services organizations. Instead of students finding us, we could find them. Emma felt her investors' instincts engaging alongside emotions she'd thought were safely buried. This was the kind of scalable social impact that venture capitalists dreamed of funding. The infrastructure requirements would be significant, she said, thinking aloud. Community partnerships, multilingual support, outreach coordination. But the impact potential would be exponential. We could reach students who don't even know these educational opportunities exist. They spent the next hour sketching out a community-focused expansion plan that bore no resemblance to the quarterly review Emma had come to conduct. Instead, they found themselves collaborating with the same synergy that had once made them believe they could change the world together. We'd need to pilot the program, Emma said, reviewing the notes they'd accumulated. Identify 3 or 4 target communities with different demographic profiles. I know just the places, Marcus replied. There's a community center in East Vancouver that serves primarily new immigrant families, a rural indigenous community about 2 hours north of here that has limited internet infrastructure, and a senior citizens complex in Richmond where there's huge interest in continuing education. Emma looked at the expansion plan they developed, seeing both its tremendous potential and its dangerous implications. Somewhere in the past hour, they'd stopped being investor and entrepreneur and become partners again. The kind of intellectual and emotional partnership that had once convinced them they were meant to build a life together. Marcus, she said carefully, this is a significant pivot from your current business model. The board would need to approve any expansion this substantial. Of course, I understand that. He met her eyes directly. But Emma, if we could make this work, if we could prove that personalized education can serve entire communities rather than just individual students, we could revolutionize how education is delivered in Canada. Maybe beyond Canada. The word "we" hung between them, heavy with implications neither of them wanted to examine too closely. Somewhere in their excitement about community impact and educational innovation, they'd forgotten the careful boundaries that had made their professional relationship possible. Emma's phone buzzed with a text from her assistant in Montreal. Peterson merger finalized. Congratulations. When are you returning? The message brought reality crashing back. Emma wasn't just Marcus's investor liaison. She was a senior analyst with Meridian Capital whose presence in Vancouver was temporary. The community expansion plan they just developed would require months of implementation, ongoing oversight, personal investment that went far beyond professional requirements. I should go, Emma said, gathering her materials with the same abruptness that had ended their personal relationship 3 years earlier. I'll prepare a formal presentation about the community expansion concept for Meridian's board review. Emma, wait. Marcus stood as she headed for the door. Did I say something wrong? 2 minutes ago we were excited about changing educational access for underserved communities. Now you're running away like we were discussing something inappropriate. She stopped at the door but didn't turn around. We were discussing something inappropriate, Marcus. We were planning a future together. A business future. A professional collaboration. Were we? Emma finally faced him, her green eyes bright with tears she refused to shed. Be honest. When you were talking about serving those communities, were you thinking about profit margins and market penetration? Or were you thinking about what we used to dream about when we were 25 and believed we could save the world through education? Marcus was quiet for a long moment, clearly wrestling with his own answer. Both, he said finally. I was thinking about both. That's the problem. I can't do both, Marcus. I can be your investor or I can be your partner, but I can't be both without losing myself in the process. She left without another word, but her absence lingered in the conference room like perfume or accusation. Marcus stood alone, staring at the expansion plan they developed together, seeing not just a business opportunity but a glimpse of the life they'd almost built before tragedy and pride and devastating mistakes had torn it all away. Outside, the Vancouver rain began falling again, washing the city clean but unable to wash away the growing certainty that some connections run too deep to be buried under professional protocols and carefully maintained emotional distance. Both Emma and Marcus spent that night staring at their respective ceilings, trying to convince themselves that what had happened in the conference room was just enthusiastic business planning. Nothing more. Neither succeeded, and both knew that their careful arrangement was about to be tested in ways that would force them to choose between safety and possibility, between protecting their hearts and opening them to the chance that sometimes, despite all evidence to the contrary, broken things could be repaired. The medical alert came at 2:47 a.m. on a Thursday in November, jolting Emma from restless sleep in her Vancouver hotel room. Her father's voice on the phone was strained but controlled, the tone of a professor used to delivering difficult information with academic precision. Emma, your grandmother had a stroke. She's stable, but the doctors say the next 24 hours are critical. She's been asking for you. Grandmère Laurent, her mother's mother, had been the anchor of their family since Emma was a child, the woman who had taught her to paint watercolors and speak French with proper Quebecois inflection, who had held Emma together during the worst days following her mother's death. At 91, she lived in a care facility in Montreal, had been growing frilier each month, but her mind remained sharp enough to remember everything Emma sometimes wished she could forget. I'll catch the first flight out, Emma said, already reaching for her laptop to book travel arrangements. The doctors aren't sure she'll. Emma, if you want to see her, don't wait. The red-eye flight from Vancouver to Montreal was turbulent, matching Emma's emotional state as she stared out the window at clouds illuminated by moonlight. She'd spent the past 3 months building a careful professional relationship with Marcus, maintaining boundaries that allowed them to work together without acknowledging the emotional undercurrents that made every meeting feel like walking through a minefield. Now, with her grandmother possibly dying and Emma forced to confront the fragility of life, those boundaries felt ridiculous. Somewhere over Saskatchewan, she made a decision that would have seemed impossible 3 months earlier. She called Marcus. Emma, his voice was thick with sleep but immediately alert. What's wrong? My grandmother had a stroke. I'm flying to Montreal. She paused, unsure why she'd felt compelled to call him. I wanted to let you know I'll miss our Thursday meeting. Of course. Emma, I'm so sorry. Is there anything I can do? The offer was so typically Marcus. Immediate, genuine, no thought for the complications it might create, that Emma felt tears threaten for the first time since her father's call. Just keep me updated on the community expansion pilot. I should be back by next week. Don't worry about the business. Take care of your family. After ending the call, Emma stared at her phone, wondering why hearing Marcus's concern had felt more comforting than all her father's careful explanations about medical procedures and prognosis. The Montreal hospital smelled like disinfectant and desperation, familiar scents from 3 years earlier when Emma had spent weeks in similar waiting rooms, watching her mother fade away while machines monitored vital signs that grew steadily weaker. Grandmère Laurent looked impossibly small in the hospital bed, her hands, once strong enough to knead bread and gentle enough to bandage scraped knees, now translucent with age and illness. Ma petite Emma, her grandmother whispered in French when Emma took her hand. I was afraid I wouldn't get to see you again. They talked for hours in the mixture of French and English that had been their private language since Emma was small. Grandmère asked about Emma's work, her life in Vancouver, whether she was happy. The questions were gentle but persistent, carrying the weight of someone who understood that time was running out. Tell me about the young man, Granmere said finally, her eyes still sharp despite her body's frailty. What young man, Granmere? The one who made you cry when you called him last night. I may be old, Emma, but I'm not blind. You've been carrying a heavy heart for 3 years. Emma shouldn't have been surprised. Her grandmother had always possessed an unsettling ability to see through emotional facades. It's complicated. Love always is, petite. But complicated doesn't mean impossible. Over the next 2 days, as Granmere Laurent drifted in and out of consciousness, Emma found herself telling her the whole story. Marcus, the accident, the 3 years of anger and grief, and now the impossible situation of working together while pretending their history didn't matter. You know what your maman would say, Granmere murmured during one lucid moment. What? That holding on to anger is like carrying a stone in your pocket. It doesn't hurt anyone but you, and it makes the journey so much heavier than it needs to be. Granmere Laurent passed away peacefully on Saturday evening, with Emma holding her hand and her father reading aloud from the poetry collection they'd both loved. Emma felt something fundamental shift inside her chest as her grandmother took her final breath. Not just grief, but a strange sense of liberation, as if some essential message had been delivered that she was only beginning to understand. The funeral was small, attended by family, friends, and former students whose lives Granmere had touched during her 60 years as a teacher. As Emma listened to the stories people shared, about lives changed through education, about the patient kindness of a woman who believed everyone deserved to learn, she realized her grandmother and Marcus had shared something essential, an unshakable faith in the transformative power of learning. She would have liked your young man, Emma's father said as they sorted through Granmere's belongings after the service. He's not my young man, Papa. No? Then why did you call him in the middle of the night when you were scared? Emma didn't have an answer, or rather, she had an answer she wasn't ready to examine too closely. The flight back to Vancouver gave her time to process everything that had happened in Montreal. Her grandmother's death felt like the closing of a chapter that had been defining Emma's life since her mother's accident. For 3 years, she'd been living in reaction to tragedy, making decisions based on pain rather than possibility. Now, with both the women who had shaped her gone, Emma faced a choice about who she wanted to become going forward. Marcus was waiting for her at Vancouver International Airport, holding a small bouquet of the white roses her grandmother had loved. The sight of him there, rumpled from what appeared to be a sleepless night, his expression full of the kind of concern that transcended professional boundaries, made Emma's carefully maintained emotional defenses crumble entirely. You didn't have to come, she said, accepting the flowers with hands that trembled slightly. Yes, I did, Marcus replied simply. How are you holding up? Instead of answering with polite reassurances, Emma found herself telling him the truth. I feel lost. She was the last connection to my mother, to the person I used to be before everything went wrong. I don't know who I am without that history. They drove through Vancouver's late-night streets in comfortable silence, the city lights reflecting off rain-slicked pavement like fallen stars. When Marcus pulled up in front of Emma's hotel, neither of them made any move to end the evening. Emma, Marcus said finally, there's something I need to tell you. While you were in Montreal, I had time to think about everything we've been avoiding talking about. Emma tensed, not sure she was ready for whatever confession or revelation he was about to share. I've been in love with you for 7 years, he continued, his voice quiet but steady. That didn't stop when you left Vancouver, and it didn't stop when you came back as my investor. I know we agreed to keep things professional, and I've tried to respect that. But your grandmother dying, you calling me in the middle of the night, Emma, life is too short and too uncertain to pretend that what we have is just business. Emma stared at him, seeing not the successful entrepreneur or the man whose choices had destroyed her family, but the 25-year-old graduate student who had once convinced her they could change the world through education and love. Marcus, she began, then stopped, unsure how to voice the thoughts that had been crystallizing during her flight home. You don't have to say anything, he said quickly. I just needed you to know. I needed to stop pretending that working with you every week wasn't the highlight of my entire existence. My grandmother said something before she died, Emma said finally. She said holding on to anger was like carrying a stone in your pocket. It only hurts you and makes the journey heavier. She sounds like she was a wise woman. She was. And she would have liked you. Emma met Marcus's eyes directly for the first time since the airport. She would have said that life is too short to waste on grudges when you could be building something beautiful instead. They sat in Marcus's car outside Emma's hotel. The weight of 3 years of separation and pain and careful professional distance finally giving way to the possibility of something different. Something that acknowledged their history without being imprisoned by it. Where does that leave us? Marcus asked. Emma considered the question seriously. I don't know. I'm not the same person I was 3 years ago, and neither are you. We can't go back to what we were. I wouldn't want to go back, Marcus said. We were kids then, playing at changing the world. Now we're actually doing it. So what do we do with that? Marcus reached across the car and took her hand. The first time they'd touched since she'd returned to Vancouver. We see if two people who've learned something about loss and forgiveness can build something new together. Not because we're trying to recapture the past, but because we're finally ready for the future. Emma felt tears she'd been holding back since her grandmother's death finally spilled down her cheeks. I'm scared, Marcus. Scared of getting hurt again. Scared of hurting you. Scared of ruining what we've built professionally. I'm scared too, he admitted. But I'm more scared of spending the rest of my life wondering what would have happened if we were brave enough to try. They didn't make any grand declarations or dramatic gestures that night. Instead, Emma invited Marcus up to her hotel room where they sat on opposite ends of the couch and talked until sunrise. About their families, their work, their dreams for the community expansion program, their fears about whether love could survive the weight of their shared history. As dawn broke over Vancouver Harbor, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold that reminded Emma of her grandmother's watercolor paintings, she realized something fundamental had shifted. They were no longer the heartbroken ex-lovers pretending to be professional colleagues. They had become something new. Two people who had learned hard lessons about life and love, and were finally ready to explore whether their connection was strong enough to build a future on. So, Marcus said as Emma walked him to the door, what happens at our Thursday meeting? Emma smiled, the first genuinely happy expression she'd worn since returning to Vancouver. I guess we find out if we can be partners in every sense of the word. 6 months later, Emma Loran and Marcus Chin announced the launch of the Community Education Initiative, a groundbreaking program that brought personalized learning platforms directly to underserved neighborhoods across Canada. Their professional partnership had evolved into something deeper, not a return to their previous relationship, but something new built on the foundation of shared loss, mutual respect, and the hard-won knowledge that some connections are strong enough to survive even tragedy. The program's success exceeded every projection, serving over 15,000 students in its first year and earning recognition from educational organizations across North America. But for Emma and Marcus, the real measure of success came in stories like Sarah Martinez, who used her French language skills to secure an internship with the Canadian Embassy in Paris, or the Rodriguez family, whose success had inspired 12 other families in their community to enroll in Chen Technologies programs. On the anniversary of her grandmother's death, Emma stood in the Vancouver cemetery where she'd finally chosen to bury her mother's ashes, no longer carrying the weight of anger that had defined her for 3 years. Marcus stood beside her, not as the man who had destroyed her family, but as the partner who had helped her transform that destruction into something meaningful. Do you think they would be proud? Emma asked, looking at the headstone that honored both her mother and grandmother. I think they would be amazed by what their daughter accomplished, Marcus replied, his arm around her shoulders. And I think they would love seeing you happy again. As they walked back through Vancouver's rain-softened streets toward the life they were building together, Emma realized her grandmother had been right about more than just letting go of anger. Sometimes the most beautiful flowers did grow from the darkest earth, and sometimes love was strong enough to bloom again after the harshest winter had passed. The echoes of tragedy would always be part of their story, but they no longer defined it. What defined Emma and Marcus now was their shared commitment to education, to community, to the belief that broken things could be repaired and lost love could be found again if two people were willing to be brave enough to try. In the end, Second chances weren't about forgetting the past or pretending it had never happened. They were about choosing to build something new on the foundation of hard-won wisdom, and trusting that love, real, tested, mature love, was strong enough to carry the weight of everything that had come before. Their story had begun with dreams of changing the world through education. It had been shattered by tragedy and rebuilt through grief. And now, finally, it was becoming something neither of them had dared to imagine. A love story that was stronger for having been broken, more beautiful for having survived the fire, and more meaningful for having transformed personal pain into collective hope. The rain continued to fall on Vancouver, washing the city clean and nourishing the new growth that spring always brought. No matter how harsh the winter had been,